Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Dave Kompel, who is, he's a trainer with the Texas Association of School Boards, but he's a veteran. He's been there nearly 40 years, training on a variety of topics, from strategic planning to dealing with difficult people. I know that's something we don't need to worry about here in Vermont, but, nonetheless. But he's also become known in the inner circle as the meetings geek, because he really is jazzed up by understanding how boards work effectively and how important board leadership is, and what the role is of the leaders, and how best to handle their responsibilities. So without any further ado, I am very happy to turn this over to our nationally recognized expert on this topic, David Kompel. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to share with board members and superintendents in the beautiful state of Vermont. My name is David Kompel, and I do work for the Texas Association of School Boards. As Susan said, I have been training school boards in Texas for a very long time. I have run our board officer academy for, nearly 30 years. So today, in this session, I'm going to give you some highlights of some things. I want to not just be me talking at you, so there'll be a place near the end where I'll ask you to turn on your mic if you have questions. That'll be when we get to the formal Q&A. But we also want you to interact using mostly the Q&A section for questions and answers, but I will ask you to do the chat for this next activity. So if you'll find the chat and just put in your name and your school district, and if you are a board officer, what office you hold, and if you're not, say, officer in waiting, and about how long have you held that office. So if you'll just go ahead and type that in chat, just so I'll know who's here, and I'll give you about a minute to do that. You got chat disabled, Susan.
Yeah, Carrie, can you
it's
enable
okay. Just
the
go
chat?
ahead and do it in Q&A then. Go ahead and do it in Q&A. That'll work.
Okay.
See Barbara and Jill, Paul, Scott. All right, I'll just go ahead and jump in. Go ahead, and there we go. There were some districts. Got a couple of board chairs here, vice chair. Okay, several chairs. All right. Well, glad you're here. Here are the things I'm going to cover today. And the challenge for me is when I have an hour, it is, what am I going to talk about in an hour? If you give me a day and a half, I can do that real easy because I've been used to that. So I'm going to cover these three areas and just give you some high points, some highlights, some things that I think are some of the key things you might consider as serving as an officer. So I'll talk about becoming an officer and what that means and what that doesn't mean. I'll give you some key tips on leading your board, and I'll talk about working with your superintendent, some things you'll want to focus on, and then I'll give you some ideas and advice on things to do to engage your community, because that's one of the really important parts of being a trustee for a public schools. And then I'll give you some quick tips on on conducting board meetings. So please feel free throughout the session, if you have questions, to type your questions, and I'll ask Carrie if there are questions that are relevant to the topic at hand, just to interrupt me, and I'll be happy to answer those. And then other questions that aren't relevant to the topic at hand, we'll wait until we're to that topic, and then just open-ended questions at the very end. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, you know, when you become a board officer, for those of you that have been doing this for a while, you know this, and for those of you that are new to it or considering it, a couple of important things to remember. And some of these are kind of obvious, but you know, your peers elect you. I looked in your laws in Vermont. So much like Texas, in most districts, in Texas, just like it is in Vermont, that the board itself actually elects the officer. So you have board chairs, and then it is a requirement. And then you don't call it secretary, you call it, I can't remember, what do you call it? What do you call it again, Susan, there?
Clerk.
Clerk. So those are the same offices, just different titles in Texas. And then you have vice chairs, which are fairly common there also. So your fellow board members place trust in you, and that's an honor that they selected you as one of their officers, and that's great. So return their trust, and we'll talk a little bit about that concept in a bit. The other key thing to remember is, yeah, you have certain authority ascribed by state law, and then, you know, by district, you know, local policy or operating procedure. But beyond those things, you don't have any special powers or duties beyond what is subscribed. And that's really important to remember, because it's sometimes happens when somebody gets elected as an officer the first time, they think they have, you know, a much bigger role than other board members. And the truth is, other than what it says in law and local policy or procedure, you don't have much. And those generally are pretty limited. So that is really, really key to remember when you become an officer, because that sometimes does trip some folks up. So remember that, you know, understand what your role actually is. Look at what they say they are from state law, as well as if you have anything above and beyond that in your local policy and or board operating procedures. So that's what I have to say about becoming an officer. Not seeing any Q&A popping up, so I'll jump to the next topic. I'm intending to be kind of brief because I really want to have a discussion and answer your questions, because I know that is really key. So leading your board, there are a lot of things to consider in leading your board. And if you only have mental space to take away one thing today, get ready, because here it comes. I think this is the most important thing, not just for leading a school board, but for superintendents leading a district, or really anybody that is on any team, or frankly, in any relationship. You ready? Remember, C and T. It's really important that you remember C and T. I put them in gold on purpose, because to me, these are the two golden words for any team or any relationship. So anybody want to guess what those might be? Put your guesses what you think C and T might be in the Q&A. That's not a rhetorical question. Just making sure you're still there. All right, not having any guesses. There's one.
There are a couple.
We do have one. Oh,
There
yeah,
you
there's a
go.
couple popping up.
You got it right off the bat, Jill. Communication and trust. And to me, the two golden questions to ask are these. What can I or what can we do to build and maintain communication? So as an officer, you need to ask what you can do. What is in your control? What can you do to build and maintain communication? And then, outline those and then identify what are the top 3 or 4, and then do those things. Do those things. The next golden question. It's the same question. We just substitute the word trust for communication. What can I, if you individually or we as a team, great team building questions, by the way, do to build and maintain trust? Again, outline what those are and then do them. I mean, the reality is what I have found is, yes, there are a lot of dynamics when it comes to working with a team. You have folks show up, they have different viewpoints, different personality styles, different communication styles. Yes, those can complicate things incredibly quick. But when it comes to actually functioning as a quality team or quality board, and I use the team intentionally, it really is quite simple when you boil it down and boil it down and keep it simple, sugar, as we say down here in Texas. And if you really focus on doing those things that you identified to maintain good communication and good trust, and really do those and monitor yourself and your team, and then make corrections as soon as possible, because this is my experience, and I bet it's every one of your experiences, regardless of what the relationship. If communication and trust are good and they're on the upward swing, you can accomplish amazing things. And sometimes, highly effective teams that have great communication and great trust in abundance, they will often say, we don't know how we accomplished so much because given the resources that we had and the person power that we had. And what I will tell you is that teams that really have good communication and good trust, they will more often than not achieve so much more than you think they could. Now, conversely, if trust or communication, if either of those start to falter, you will see teams that start to have problems. And if you allow those to get out of hand for too long, then it's sometimes very difficult to maintain them or to rectify them. And for some people, especially if it becomes a major trust violation, it's very hard to regain that. So defend what you can do as a board officer, board member, or superintendent in doing what you can to build and maintain good communication and good trust. Really, really key. Like I said, if you only go away with one thing today, that's the one thing. And there's a lot more that I'm going to share, but that to me is so key. I've worked with so many teams over the years, and this really is incredibly helpful. In fact, you can do an entire team building session just answering that question, prioritizing that, and then setting a roadmap out for your team to build and maintain good communication and trust. And as a leader on your board, whether you're whatever your officer role or non-officer role is, doing what you can to do those really makes a huge difference. Not seeing any questions pop up. Carrie, let me know if any come up while I jump ahead, and I'll come back. Let's talk about working with your superintendent, and especially when it comes to the board chair. You will work with your superintendent more than other members of your board for one reason in particular, and many other reasons. That is putting the agenda together. Like I said, I went out and looked at your rules in Vermont when it comes to the board chair, and just like in Texas and most other states, the board chair and superintendent work closely together on putting the board agenda together. And that is key. And one of the key things to having effective board meetings is keeping the focus of the board meeting governance focused. So I think one of the important concepts of having your board chair and your superintendent work on the agenda together is that they work to ensure that the board meeting is about board business and it isn't primarily about administrative business. I've worked with so many teams over the years that have asked me to come, hey, how can we shorten our meeting? And almost always what I've found is meetings that are really long either have to do a larger district, and that when you're in a very large district, you have a lot more business to handle just because of the sheer size. But even those and medium or small districts, if you focus on governance issues and not administrative issues in your board meetings any more than you have to, there are certain administrative things that you need to, but don't spend a lot of time on administrative issues that could be better handled by your superintendent, your staff, and that is key. And so, putting that agenda together with the chair and the superintendent, focusing on the governance issues and the things that boards actually need to be spending their time and attention on versus what the staff needs to do. That is really key. And then the other thing when it comes to working with a superintendent, particularly as an officer, you will be working a little bit more and communicating more with the superintendent than some other board members, and that is normal. If you find that is normal, but you'll be an extra conduit, if you will, between the superintendent and the rest of the board. And I encourage all board members to have regular communication with the superintendent, but particularly your board chair will be communicating with the superintendent a lot more too. And then also just going back to those concepts of communication and trust, that is equally important with the superintendent as a member of your team. In Texas, we have a shorthand phrase. We call it the team of 8, because most districts in the state of Texas, there are 7 board members and the superintendent. And that is just saying that the superintendent is part of that governance process. Even though they're not a voting member, but they're part of that, and a key part of that is that communication piece. So that is really important also to remember when it comes to interacting with the superintendent as a board officer. Any additional questions on working with the superintendent?
I don't see any questions right now.
All right. Engaging with the community, community engagement is so important, and it's one of the areas that I'm focusing a little bit more now. It is so essential that we engage our community, because they're public schools. Your public pays taxes. Their children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews go to their public schools. So it really is important that you engage with your community. It always has been, and I think today, given the current environment and all the things that we've all gone through the last few years together, that many community members want greater engagement and want more information. And to me, that's a good thing. So some of the things that you can do, particularly as a board officer and as a superintendent, it really does start with your attitude. Having an attitude of open engagement. And I know that is challenging, because sometimes we have some community members that are challenging, and that's just the reality. But even with those people that are challenging, or you might think are difficult, it's important that you keep in control of what you have control of. And the key one is your attitude. Be open to engagement, be open to, having those folks have input, making sure that you have systems in place, whether they're electronic or a phone call, or let's, meet for coffee, or, different, types of forums that you might have, especially on big issues. Give the community an opportunity to engage. And even if that is on social media, I know that some folks dread that social media and wish we could turn it off, but guess what? It's here to stay. So, that is a tool to get in community engagement, even if it's just, and I don't recommend it only be just a one-way street of you getting information out, but that's better than nothing. But having that attitude of engagement, and my mantra is, these are the public schools. I'm a public servant, so one of my jobs is to engage my public, and do it with relish. And here's the thing that I've known, even when I work in district where there's some challenges, and sometimes even some big challenges, realize that most communities and the vast majority of community members, they're not on any far side of a bell curve. Those bell curves, on those extreme ends, you have the zealots, and those folks sometimes want to make it seem like they're a bigger percentage of the population. They are. The reality is the vast majority of people, 70 to 80% of the public, 78% or more of the public in your district, in your communities, most of those people are somewhere in the middle. They want good schools for their kids. They want, that they want their tax dollars spent wisely and well, and they want their kids to have a great education. They support your public schools. They support your educators. They support your administrators. And by and large, they also support your boards. So remember that most of your community are I call them, the people from Missouri, because Missouri is the show me state. They just want to see what you're doing, and part of community engagement is informing those folks. And the naysayers, they're going to, do their thing, and they're going to, sling half truths and all out, misinformation at times. But remember, they are a tiny fraction of your community. So that is really key to remember, especially if you're having a tough run of it. Just remember, you're there for the vast majority. You're there for the whole community, even the naysayers, but the vast majority of your community members, your parents, they're for public education. They really are. Which leads me to my next key point about community engagement. And it really is the number one skill that you can use really in any environment, but particularly as a public servant, and particularly as an officer or a superintendent in a public school district. And that is learning to be a great listener. It is, you've heard it many times, but I don't just think it, I don't just believe it. I know it is the skill that you need to really hone to be a better team member and to be a better leader, and in this context, to be somebody that truly engages with that. So what does it mean to be a great listener? To me, what it means is starting with that attitude. I really want to understand where this person is coming from, even if I don't like what they're saying. You don't have to like it to listen, but really coming with an attitude of, as Stephen Covey said many, many years ago, seek first to understand. And that means putting that three-letter word aside that makes it difficult for us to hear. The three-letter word is ego. Putting that aside and really coming from a place of curiosity, of understanding where they're coming from. So that is, point number one, having that attitude of, I want to understand where they're coming from, And then learning how to, the next key thing, one of the key things, and I could do a whole day workshop just on listening, but one of the other key things is learning to ask good, open-ended questions. And occasionally, you'll ask closed-ended questions, but if you really want to understand where people are coming from, ask questions like, can you tell me why you have a concern about, the bond proposal that we have out? Can you tell me what concerns you about what's going on in elementary school? And then when they tell you, ask more open-ended questions. Oh, so you're concerned that it's going to raise your tax rate. Tell me a little bit more where you got that information from and why you believe that. Really asking those open-ended questions to understand where they're coming from. And then one of the keys is really, really stick with them. Stay in the moment. And it's hard sometimes, especially if they're saying things that you may not like, or they're being, a little bit intense. But stay with them, because your job is to listen to them and seeking to understand. I see that question. I'll get to it when I'm done with this thought. And that is to paraphrase back what you heard them saying. So what you said was this, and this, and I'm not saying word for word, because that's annoying, but just give them the essence to let them know that you're hearing it. And the big reason that you do that is not just to let them know that you're hearing that, but that will force you to listen at a deeper level. And it does take discipline. It does take discipline to listen, what I call listening deeply. And then what I tell folks, kind of something that not a lot of people teach, but I've been using this technique for years. When you paraphrase back to them, ask them at the end of that, did I get it? And if they say yes, you say thank you. And if they say no, then you say something like, what did I miss? Could you tell me what I missed? And then let that's an open-ended question, and we'll let them repeat it back. And then you can say a different question at the end of that. Is there more? And if they say no, great. And if they say yes, you say, well, go ahead and tell me more, until you get to a point where they've said, yeah, you've got it all. And that is key. So that's one method to great listening, but it does begin with an attitude of opening and an attitude of curiosity. I really want to hear where they're coming from, even if they disagree with me. Putting that ego aside. Let me see what this question is, and I'll respond to that. All right. Carrie, would you want to go ahead and read that question out?
Sure, no problem. Our local school board is part of a larger school district. For my local district, as my role as chair, I communicate and coordinate more with the principal than the superintendent. We have a great relationship, and they are my POC to coordinate a point of contact to coordinate agenda development. To be sure that our superintendent attends our local meetings helps to build relationships with the board. As chair, supervisory union board, I work directly with the superintendent. That to say that for me, my working with both the principal and superintendent are different based on which board or hat I'm wearing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know that there's unique configurations like that in different states. So yeah, if that's if that's the way you do it there, that's great. Just make sure that that's the proper role. It sounds like it is, and if you have that unique relationship with the principal because of the makeup of your district, that's great. Any questions about the piece on engaging with your community? Okay.
I don't see any right now.
Yep, me neither. All right. Let's talk now about the topic area that I could, that I've regularly done whole day workshops on, and that is conducting meetings. So please be ready with your questions on this, because I'll be happy to answer these questions. So conducting board meetings, there's a lot to it. One of the key things, especially if you're a new chair or a chair that wants to be better at it, that is learning meeting protocol and meeting procedure. I know that you all have it. I can't remember if I saw that. I think it was in your Vermont laws, but districts use Robert's Rules of Order or parliamentary procedures. Most boards in the country that use some form of parliamentary procedures do use Roberts. There are some exceptions, but learning Robert's Rules of Order. I know that you all have some resources on your website. I am a big fan of one in particular book on simplifying Robert's Rules of Order, and there are a ton of great resources out there. It certainly is not the only one. It's important that you have the official Robert's Rules of Order book. The 12th edition is the most current edition. For many people, going through that and understanding that can be difficult. I know that. I've looked at it, read it many times, and I know that it is difficult for some people just because the language in some ways is a bit difficult to follow. There are a number of great books out there for understanding Robert's Rules of Order in a more easy to digest way, if you will. My personal favorite is called Notes and Comments on Robert's Rules of Order. Notes and Comments on Robert's Rules of Order. The lead author now is a man named Jim Slaughter. I think they're in their 5th or 6th edition. I actually got familiar with the book 35 years ago when its original author, John Erickson, actually presented at a couple of our conferences many years ago. And that's where I first got. The reason that I like that book, and there are others that I like a lot, it's just my personal favorite. But the reason I like it is it's written in a very simple to follow style. It's written in a question and answer type file, and it's written in a way that makes sense to a lot more people. It kind of follows the flow from making a motion to amending a motion in a pattern that makes sense to folks. The one thing that I will tell you as publicly elected officials, it is really important whether you're reading the official Robert's Rules of Order or Notes and Comments or any of the other simplified books on reading Robert's Rules of Order. It is important to remember that as a publicly elected official, you have a order of precedence, if you will, and it starts with law. So in Vermont, you have, I'm assuming you have some type of open meeting laws. So those will supersede Robert's Rules of Order. So if Robert's is one thing and your open meeting laws is something else, your open meeting laws supersedes what Robert said. So then you have that, and then you'll have local policy and or operating procedures or bylaws, whatever you call them. Those also supersede Robert's Rules of Order. So it's really important that you understand those things and you're aware of those things too, in addition to the Robert's Rules of Order. Really key. So understanding those things. I saw a question. Did I miss a question? Did I see a question?
No,
Mary?
they were looking for some resources and I just sent them the information.
Okay, great. All right. So the other key thing in terms of chairing a meeting, and that is your job as the meeting chair is to be as impartial as possible. You're never going to be perfect, but be impartial as possible when you're running a meeting. Make sure that all members that want to have their say get a chance to have their say. Let folks have a chance to share their 2 cents worth. If it goes beyond 2 cents worth, learn how to gently and friendly, get them to, kind of wrap it up, because some folks do want to go 4, 5, 6 cents worth, and that can be troubling and challenging. But learning how to facilitate and be impartial. One of the misunderstandings for some folks that learned Robert's Rules of Order, most folks that if they ever learned it, they learned it in high school, and they learned the more formal Robert's Rules of Order that I don't recommend school boards use. You should use the more relaxed version of Robert's Rules of Order. And a lot of those people think, oh, the board chair can't enter into discussion or make a motion. That's not accurate for the section in Robert's Rules called Notes and Comments, which I'm guessing most of you probably follow that, even though you don't, maybe not aware of that. But it allows the chair to enter into discussion, to make motions, and to vote, which I recommend you follow those processes. And that is because you were elected by your community, and then you were elected by your board to be the board chair. So you should be entering into those discussions. You should be making those motions. But going back to being impartial, it is really important that as chair, even though I encourage you to enter into those discussions, is you need to hold back if you're chairing the meeting and let other members of your board have their 2 cents worth before you to share your 2 cents worth. That is really key. And then let other members of the board make a motion or make a second when you get to that point. If nobody has made it and you waited and you feel strongly about it, then do it. But just kind of like lean back, let other people have their say, let other people make a motion. If folks are silent and it's been, going on, and I say, minimum of a 3 count, and that's 1001, 1002, 1003 before you share your 2 cents worth. That is really key, because one of the things you don't want to do as chair is to be, known as the chair who gets out in front frequently. That will shut down discussion. Folks, will start to get the perception that you're not impartial. So you want to lean back. And the metaphor that I've used for many years when it comes to running a meeting, and that is the metaphor of a traffic cop. If you're chairing the meeting, your job is to make sure that the meeting flows. The meeting flows smoothly, that folks on your board get a chance to share their 2 cents worth, and that your job is to keep that meeting flowing smoothly. Really, really key. So in addition to learning Robert's Rules of Order, you'll want to learn some skills and tools for facilitating a meeting. And really, there are a number of tools, but some of the biggest tools that you can use as a board chair, and I'll model some of these for you now, and that is simply using nonverbals. Encouraging folks to share their point of view, or just looking at them and nodding. It could be even simple like that. And then if somebody is getting a little long-winded, you might just kind of like look at them and say, you don't want to do it up too big, like real small. It's like maybe that, but different nonverbals to run the meeting. Eye contact is key. The other thing that I think is really key for running effective meetings, and that is having agreed upon meeting protocol and procedures that are written down and understood. And here's the key concept. Where there are no clear rules, people will make up their own. So having those protocols in place that folks know about is really key. And if you want to be, a good board moving forward, even after, you're not the chair, having those clearly understood protocols and procedures. I saw another question up there, Carrie.
All taken care of.
Okay.
They're looking for resources from our website, so I just take care of them for you.
Okay, great. Let's see, in terms of, what questions do you have in terms of board meetings? Okay. Then let's just go to open Q&A, and I'll stay and answer your question. I wanted to just answer your questions because folks come with different needs, and I never know what they are in these types of forums. So what questions do you have about anything that I've covered so far, or really anything else about being a board officer? All right, then I'll prime the pump a little bit while you're thinking of some question. Oh, there we go. Go ahead and read those out to me, Carrie.
Sure. Do all boards consider public comments a comment? I think that means option, but not a
Yeah.
dialogue. Oh, a comment opportunity, but not a dialogue.
Yeah, so I don't know, Susan, you might help with this. I'm not sure what your rules are there in Vermont. In the state of Texas, the public comments or public forum, it is required by our state open meetings laws, but I'm not sure what it is in Vermont.
Right. So a public comment period is required at every meeting. And the VSBA certainly encourages you to use that as a public comment opportunity and not a driver of discussion, because that will derail your meeting and move you off your timed agenda. And it's not up to the public to determine what the school board takes up as an issue. If it's a new issue that's being raised by the public and it seems to have some legitimacy to the functioning of your school system, then it may be an item that you as chair want to propose to your board for a future agenda item. But in the public comment period is really not the time to engage in dialogue about that, about anything, even an agenda item. And if it's something where there's a lot of community interest and they really want to have a whole blown out discussion about it, I encourage you to set up a public forum and have a separate meeting for the public to be able to have the full conversation and discussion that they need to have and want to have, with the board hearing what your constituents are saying and where their feelings are about whatever the topic may be, but not to take that on during your regularly scheduled board meeting.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and again, I don't know Vermont law like I know Texas law, but it's pretty common throughout the country that the protocol is all the communication with whoever has the microphone doing public comment, public forum, that the chair is the only person that interacts with them. On the rare instances where there needs a clarification on something, and it really incredibly rare, they might ask the superintendent to clarify, but it really should be, here's my rule of thumb. Public comment is really a monologue. It's not a dialogue.
And someone, one of the other board chairs here made that comment. We offer 2 public comments, both times as a way of listening to what our public wants to tell us. Sometimes the issues that they bring forward end up on the agenda or as a public Q&A. So it's supporting what both of you have said to this point. We have another question.
Yeah, let me just address one thing real quick, Carrie. So one of the things that will really help you with the public comment is to have a good protocol for announcing what the public comment is, to let folks know. And kind of what I've recommended for many years, and many Texas districts do this, is they let folks know what I call it the rules of the game of public comment are up front. So if you have, a website, a part on your website about, board meetings, you might have a piece on there indicating, hey, here's public comments. In many districts in Texas, I'm guessing maybe in Vermont, folks are, sign up, ahead of time just so that the chair and the superintendent know, what's coming up. But you put out, here's how public comments are. Here's the, procedure that we use. And then, wherever they sign up, whether it's on the website or if they're signing up, right at the board meeting, outside, if you have a little table, you have the procedure, the protocol of here's what public comment is, here's what it isn't, here's what, here's what's, okay to talk about, here's what's not. Here's how it will do that in the public. Here's how we'll interact. And then, so you've told them ahead of time, maybe on the website, maybe, only right at the board meeting, outside the board meeting. And then I also recommend when it comes time to do that public comment, public forum section, that the chair actually read out kind of, again, maybe a truncated version. Here's what we do. And so that folks know, and that is particularly important for folks, maybe they haven't been to a board meeting before. And because it can be perceived as off-putting by some community members that I thought we were going to have a dialogue and here it is just a monologue and I feel like they're not really listening to me. But just let them know that up front. It really takes the sting out of that perception if folks realize that these are kind of the rules of public forum for everybody. It's not just this one time or it's not just your issue. That is kind of key.
If I may,
Okay,
build
David.
Yeah.
can I just build on that? Sorry, Carrie.
Absolutely.
Most of our board meetings don't require that kind of speakers list. I know a lot of districts started doing that when meetings moved to digital platforms for the pandemic, because it was some way to make order out of chaos. However, it's not a bad idea if you anticipate that you're going to have multiple speakers. It's not usually necessary,
Right.
but if you know that you have a hotly debated topic on your agenda and you anticipate a mob at your meeting, that is a time that we actually encourage the board chair, with the board's consent, to institute a one-off policy for that particular discussion in the interest of keeping your meeting timely and moving. And so it may be something that you limit at each speaker in time, 2 minutes or something, or you limit them to only be able to speak once, those kinds of things. And I'm agreeing with David completely that the most important thing with any of this is setting expectations. So making sure people do understand that this is not a dialogue from the beginning, all attendees should understand that. And there are multiple ways to do that. Dave has mentioned some right at the meeting. There are others where your agendas are posted, right on the agenda. Put your public comment patterns, rules, whatever you want to call them, protocols. But don't be afraid to exercise a different protocol if you really think, if you're talking about closing a building or something that's really going to upend the community, you really do want to make sure you hear from as many people as you can on that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Susan.
Sure.
And Susan, I think you did a pretty good job answering the other question that was on this topic. It was, could you elaborate more on how to address dysregulated behaviors that are contributing to unsafe environments for both peers and staff? The public has shared in public comment their concerns. Could you share methods to engage the board with the community? I think, Susan, what you just said kind of let them know how to deal with the bad behaviors, if there are some from the community in their comments.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just remind, for me, Susan said it more eloquently than me, and that is setting those expectations up front. This is what we'll do. This is what we won't do, and just letting that be known. That is really key. And if somebody is really acting out, which is incredibly rare, then you can always call a quick recess if you need to. But that's pretty rare.
Sure. We have one more
Other
question on a
questions?
different topic. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We have a board member that says, I serve on 2 boards and the negotiations work happen very differently with each superintendent. I'm wondering if you folks have clarity or advice on what role the superintendent should play in negotiations.
Susan, I'm going to punt that to you since that's not something I deal with.
Okay. I ask for clarification. When you're talking about negotiations, I assume you're talking about collective bargaining and your contract. And if that is the case, then the superintendent usually is representing the board's interest on that more than the union's interest, but they typically, by Vermont law, unfortunately, don't actually have a stated role in the negotiations. Which, for better or worse, it's the way it is. So I hope that answers your question. They often will be sitting in executive session or something. The superintendent may be invited into the negotiating committee's conversations to respond to something that just came up at the table, because they provide information that may clarify what the issue is on a more operational basis than the board has access to, perhaps. But generally speaking, they don't have an official role in the collective bargaining.
And I see Paul, thanks for sharing that. Poor meeting behavior, VLCT. Susan, what does that stand for?
Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Yeah, Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Okay, has a great presentation on unruly behavior, which has some great suggestions. Yeah, if you all have that link, send it to me. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see that stuff.
Paul, if
We've
you
just
have
got-
that link, if you can share that in the Q&A, I would be happy, or Carrie can put it into the chat. No, she can't, because it's
Into
disabled.
the follow-up.
We'll
I'll
put it
send it
in
in
the
the follow-up
follow-up
email.
email. If
Okay,
you can
great.
supply us with that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Let me just give, so we've got just a couple of minutes left. Thank you so much, Susan and Carrie, for your help. And thank you all for inviting me today. Let me just give you one more tip that some of you probably already do, but if you don't, consider this. And that if, I know that you all have those 2 required officers. If you have a vice chair also, one of the things that I think is a really good practice in high-performing teams do this, and that is to cross-train the other officers to run a meeting. That all the officers should be cross-trained to do each of their, jobs, but particularly when it comes to running meetings, that is really, really key. Because the worst time to learn how to run a meeting is when the board chair calls you 45 minutes before and says, "Hey, my boss is going to make me work late. Can you chair the meeting?" And if you're the vice chair and you've never chaired a meeting, that's not a good time to learn. So do that
So, David,
cross training.
Can I just let you know that today we have a weekly email that goes to all of our board members, and in the weekly email today, one of the tips, the governance tips, was some cross training to do for vice chairs. So some of the responsibilities of the chair has delegated to their vice chairs based on our board chair forum. They gave us some great ideas, and we put it in today's email, just so you know.
Yeah, that's great. So that's really key to do. So do that. Let me just say this. I have had the great pleasure for many years to travel around mostly the state of Texas. I actually was at the Vermont conference, oh gosh, probably 18 years ago, at your annual conference, and I presented some. Whether you're an officer or what I call a POB, plain old board member, I thank you for your service. I am a product of public education. I am a huge advocate of public education, not just in the state of Texas, but throughout our nation. I know that the work that you do as board members and as superintendents, administrators, teachers, other staff is some of the most important work that happens in every community. And I am honored to serve that you, and I am so grateful for people like you that care about the children and youth of your communities. Thank you so much for inviting me. Carrie, Susan, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, David. We really appreciate hearing from you and all of your wisdom. Thank you very much for spending the hour with us. I want to completely echo your statements. I too am a product of public education. My children are products of public education, and it is very much at my core. And I too want to thank all of the board members who are largely volunteers around the state of Vermont, because it's not an easy job. VSBA tries very hard to support you in the work you're doing, and we have in the last couple of years really beefed up the support for board officers particularly. So I just want to remind everybody of a couple of upcoming dates. First of all, we have the board chair forums, which are not recorded. They are your time to jump online for an hour and chat with other board chairs, board officers, compare notes, find out what's working, share your dilemmas of what isn't working, get other suggestions from other people who are struggling with similar issues. Those who attend find them really helpful and useful, and it's just really, really nice to have that kind of networking community. So those forums are coming up on May 19th and 6 weeks later, June 30th at 9 a.m. And you can register for those from the VSBA website under events, under board chair forums. And we also, if any of you are new chairs, you may not know that in Vermont statute, there's a requirement for 8 hours of training jointly between the superintendent and the board chair. And this is something that went into law, oh gosh, a bunch of years ago. And it's to make sure that the district is really moving forward and that all parties are on the same page, that you have the same agenda. And that's coming up also. And we're breaking it into 2 sessions. So we have a 1-hour webinar on May 10th from 3 to 4 p.m. and followed up by a live event. Yes, really in-person live. You can sit down at a table face-to-face with somebody else and have a meal together. That's from 12:30 to 7:30 at the Hilton Hotel in Burlington, which that includes a networking dinner. So the program is very rich throughout the day, culminating in a dinner for networking purposes, giving you an opportunity to put faces to names with people that you're meeting at the online forums, or just to meet other board chairs who are in districts that you perceive may be similar to yours, having similar issues. So please, please, please do put those dates on your calendar. You should be getting numerous reminders about all of them. And I just wanted to give you one more. And I want to just share this with you. Whoops, that's not what I want to do. Yep. Well, that's sort of what I wanted to do. I just want to thank you again. Dave didn't know that the final slide is thanking you for your commitment to our children, but it is. And just to remind you that as you log off, you'll be given a link to a 3-question survey. We do really read them. We do really pay attention. We do really want your feedback. So take a minute, please, and give us that. And thank you very much for attending. I will be back the end of May for the next webinar, and then you'll never see me again. But the next webinar also proves to be a good one. We're going to have a panel talking about the benefits of having a summer retreat for your board. So join us then, join us for the board chair activities, and I will see you soon. Thank you.